fight together. There's power when we organize. Power when we stand and fight together. There's power when we organize.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham.
Working people brought this bill to a screeching halt. We mobilized in record time, and we're not about to stand down.
AFL-CIO President Rich Trumka on the stalled Republican Senate health care bill. Labor isn't letting up in its campaign to stop this bill.
We're running ads. We're flooding Senate offices with phone calls. We're mobilizing in the states. We're going all out. It's time for Congress to abandon this reckless plan and come together on a bipartisan basis to improve the Affordable Care Act. That's what voters want.
Trumka says the AFL-CIO isn't fooled by what Trump and his Republicans are doing with this so-called health care bill.
Make no mistake, this bill isn't a health care plan at all. It's a massive transfer of wealth from workers to Wall Street. It obliterates Medicaid. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, it will increase the number of uninsured Americans by 22 million, and it cuts taxes for millionaires while it raises taxes on hardworking men and women who have negotiated high-quality health care. This bill is a sham, and it's a shame. So working families are fighting back. We're fighting for our children, our parents, and our community. This is a vicious, vicious assault on America's health care security.
Sandra Falwell is a D.C. registered nurse and a member of National Nurses United.
This bill poses a mortal threat to the health and well-being of our country. As registered nurses, we recognize that this is an extremely mean-spirited and callous bill that would substantially harm our patients. Instead of kicking tens of millions of people off of health insurance, we need to move forward to the only system that will guarantee that everyone has access to safe therapeutic health care, a single-payer Medicare for all.
For Zahara Heckscher, a breast cancer survivor being treated with very expensive medicines, the GOP health care bill is life-threatening.
Health insurance means that I can do the treatments that my doctors think is best, take the modern medicines that my doctors think are going to extend my life as long as possible. 7
government employee unions oppose privatization of America's air traffic control system. Republicans in the House version of the FAA reauthorization bill included privatization. The unions, including AFGE, AFSCME, and the National Association of Government Employees, say that, quote, overhauling the entire aviation system by removing air traffic control from federal oversight and funding will be a serious setback for its development and growth. End quote. WIN is brought to you in part by the Amalgamated Transit Union, the largest labor union representing transit and allied workers in the U.S. and Canada. Online at atu.org. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for tuning in. Lots to get to today. Lots of just head scratching. It's one of those days where you look at what fake news is pumping out, the propaganda network there at Fox News, and it's mind-blowing when you look at the facts of this healthcare. And Paul Ryan, I love the thinking coming out of the right-wing echo chamber of the propaganda machine there. Paul Ryan, just basically dismissed the entire CBO report, are saying that, people just don't want health insurance. They just don't want it. He says people will choose not to buy something they don't like. Yeah, those 22 million people who are going to be uninsured because of what they do, well, 23 million what he wants to do. Actually, probably more than that if he really got what he wanted. Those people chose. They chose not to buy health insurance. That's it. Granted, health insurance for a family of 5 would be probably about $2,000 a month. If you make $1,500 a month, you just chose not to make that extra $500 a month to give the insurance companies. I get it. It's well, maybe I don't. I mean, it's just one of these things where you look at the statements coming out of these people's mouths. It's insane. You look at another Fox contributor, this Lisa Kennedy Montgomery. Well, again, completely dismissive. People are going to die anyway. They don't know. She said, quote, "You know what? At least they're not employing any hyperbole at all. No exaggeration, no hysteria. You know what the crazy thing is," she says, "we're all going to die. And they can't predict. There's no way unless they're absolutely psychic and have a party line to heaven. They don't know who's going to die and when or how many people they don't know." You're right. But you know what I do know? By taking health insurance away from people, they're going to die sooner. And again, there's this thought, well, we're all going to die. Fatalistic, if the bullet comes my way. Yeah, if the bullet comes your way, it's still got to be shot out of a gun. The gun that these folks seem to love. If you don't have access to care, I mean, this is common sense. This I can't even believe that it has to be said. If you get sick and you don't go to the doctor and it gets worse and you don't go to the doctor because, hey, I can't afford it, and it gets worse and you don't go, guess what? You will die sooner. We know that. We see the studies they're in. Poor people without health access die 10 years sooner than everyone else. We know that. And maybe they don't know. Maybe they don't. Maybe they like to remain blissfully ignorant. Now you had another Fox contributor, this Charles Gastaprino. He says just because they don't get insurance doesn't mean they don't get health care. Yep, that's true. They get health care at that moment. They get stabilized. They're not going to die at that very moment. They get stabilized and they get shipped somewhere else. Because that's the law. And I had someone send me this the other day saying, no, Rick, you're wrong. They have to treat you. No, they have to treat you so that you don't die at that moment. They have to treat you to stabilize you, and then they ship you somewhere else. That's the law. You can't die at that moment. But a long-term continuity of care to make sure that you get treatment, that you get better, that's not the goal. It's just so you don't die right there in their facility. And we saw this in California when you had hospitals literally shipping people, stabilizing, making sure they're not going to die right now. They seem okay. We drugged them up. They'll be good for the next couple hours. Quick, call a cab. Take them to Skid Row. That happened. And what's frustrating to me, you see this political theater, this nonsense, this propaganda, this BS coming out of fake news. For instance, you got this Ainsley Earhart, who said the CBO was extremely positive. It was good stuff. It was exactly what we liked. Eric Bolling, one of their hosts, said the whole mainstream media will say, oh my God, 22 million people. But that's over the course of a decade. So, hey, we're willing to sacrifice 22 million people over 10 years, even though the reality is next year, 15 million of those people will lose their insurance. Next year. Never mind the facts. Don't forget about that. You had Grover Norquist on saying, well, discussing Americans who will be left without health insurance is like referring to people being kicked out of East Germany when the wall came down. Yeah, I see that. I see that. And see, the sad thing about it is this is how they framed this entire discussion to the minions and the nitwits who watch this nonsense. That it's tyranny. How dare they make you get health care so that when you and your family get sick, you get to see a doctor. How dare they do that? Those no good for nothings. Boiling also said, in the CBO scoring, besides the 20 million uninsured, even though it was 22 million, Planned Parenthood is defunded for a year, and there's a whole heck of a lot of tax relief. There's tax relief. And again, I keep going back to what's really important to the Republican Party? Stealing from the coffers. Absolutely. Funding the very wealthy. Absolutely. I mean, it's nuts. It's nuts. And one of my favorites, this Matt Schlapp, who said, quote, "It's ironic. It's many Democratic voters who say they're pro-choice and they should have the right to make health care decisions over their own body. Somehow it's wrong when they decide, hey, I'm going to make my own decisions and not get health insurance." Yeah, I know lots of people. I know thousands, millions. There are millions of people in this country who go, you know what? It's my right to die when I get sick and not be able to see a doctor. They're out there. In fact, there are huge parades every day of people, thrilled with the fact that they can't afford health insurance. Stop and think about how just insane these arguments are. I mean, it's really crazy. A liberty and freedom argument based on if I get sick, I can die? I got nothing. And which is why I try not to watch Fox News too often. John Scott, one of the other folks there, he points out if millions of Americans don't have health insurance, that's kind of the American way. Let that sink in for a minute. It's kind of the American way. Hey, kind of the American way. And you want to talk about bad optics? As we're discussing 22 million people losing their health insurance, anywhere from, I've seen numbers between 11 and 17,000, all the way up as high as 55,000 people going to die because of this. And, the numbers are all, they are what they are. We know tens of thousands. We know thousands of people are going to die. We know that. And yesterday what you had the president holding his 2020 re-election campaign fundraiser and brought in about $10 million, $35,000 a plate to go to the Trump Hotel, the Trump International Hotel for a big fundraiser. Something seriously, seriously wrong. Now, there's nothing. Look, it is what it is. I mean, it's our system, it's our game, it's the gig. I get it. But while talking about taking health insurance away from children, from seniors, from the poor and the downtrodden, someone who's not going to make $35,000 in an entire freaking year, which these people can knit away on one rubber chicken. There's something seriously wrong there. Just wrong. Anyway, lots to get to today. When we come back, going to talk about the hearing with Alexandra Acosta from the Department of Labor and what that means for workers across the country. Also, some interesting legislation here in Pennsylvania. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
All of my life I have searched for clarity. I have wrestled with two paths buried deep inside of me. I lost some rounds, been knocked around, felt my share of defeat. Yet somehow I've always managed to get back on my feet.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
There is no other agency like the EPA. It should really be renamed the Job-Killing Organization of America.
Cause, brothers, it's a fact. If we take and don't put back, they'll have to pay for all we did. So let's leave some.
Yes, the Job-Killing Organization of America. That's it. Because who wants to breathe clean air? Who wants to drink clean water? Who wants safe working? Who wants that stuff? Bad for business. The latest report I saw, researchers you've been using data of health records from Medicare, from the folks who get Medicare, and from pollution readings over the last 12 years. And what they've concluded is that there's a link between specific air quality levels and death rates. They point out that for every increase in just 10 micrograms in small particulate pollution known as PM 2.5, the death rate went up 7.3%. That's about 120,000 fatalities of people 65 and older. They point out for every 10 parts per billion rise in ozone concentration, the mortality rate rises by 1.1%. Tack on an extra 19,000 deaths. And hey, bad for business. So we kill off some old people. Those are bad years anyway, right? It's just kind of nuts. It's just not just kind of nuts. It is nuts. Anyway, here to talk about the big hearing that happened, I guess it was yesterday, at the U.S. Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Labor, Health, and Human Services, Education, and Related Agencies. Make that any longer. And Alexander Acosta testifying about some of his decisions. I've got Marcy Goldstein Gelb to come talk with us. She's the executive director of the National Council for Occupational Safety and Health. Marcy, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thanks for having me, Rick.
So, I'm looking at all of this stuff. The Trump administration, as I've been saying, the idea is we're going to loosen air quality regulations. We're going to loosen particulate regulations at job sites. But those are job killers. We can't have that.
Well, Rick, I think that we don't want to have worker killers or public killers. I think we want to have thriving businesses and healthy communities and workers. So I think we can have all of that. I really do.
And I would hope so. But, I look at this administration and the things that they're doing. It just seems like everything is in this, we got to be business friendly, and whoever it harms, well, that's tough.
Well, I think that, people are getting involved and they're speaking up. And what they're saying is that, if you truly care about the communities and you truly care about working people, then there are things that you could be doing that really support and invest in communities. And so the hearing the other day is an example of an area where our federal government can really be making a difference in saving lives. OSHA, over the past, since it was founded, has saved so many people. Thousands and thousands of workers have been able to live and thrive, and a reduction in injuries as a result of employers being clear about what safety measures are needed to save lives, and having OSHA be available for inspections and for citations. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't think it should be stronger, absolutely, but weaker, not so much.
Yeah, now, during the hearing, Joe Manchin questioned the Department of Labor head on this idea of compliance assistance as opposed to enforcement. The idea, and as I was listening to this, I'm trying to think about it in my own life. Let's say, the police department now says, you know what, we're no longer going to enforce speeding. We're only going to help you comply. How many people would be driving down the road at 100 miles an hour?
Well, I happen to agree with you. I think that deterrence is absolutely critical, and that's why OSHA has played such an important role, is not opposed to that at all. I think the two go hand in hand. For employers that need assistance in training their workers or being aware and educated about standards, I'm all for providing assistance to them. I also think that employers that are not following the law there needs to be teeth in OSHA so that employers realize that it's not just a cost of business to have a worker lose their life, and that there's a trail of tears behind every injury and death. And that's something that OSHA plays a really critical role. So I am absolutely all in favor of providing compliance assistance. In fact, one of the areas that has been zeroed out in the FY18 proposed budget is precisely a compliance assistance program, a Susan Harwood training grant program, which benefits employers and workers. So this is one area where we could all come together and say, yes, let's provide assistance to employers, which benefits workers as well. And, if we invest in that, then we'll save lives and it'll save a great deal of money as well.
Now, as it was, as came out during the hearing, I think it was Joe Manchin who actually questioned the idea of budget cuts that would actually, I guess, cut 26 employees and would cause, I guess, 1,000 fewer inspections. I look at this and maybe you've got the numbers, but the last number I saw for a federal OSHA inspector to hit every workplace in this country would be like 140 years.
Yeah, exactly.
So this, to me, seems to only make that worse.
Absolutely. I mean, basically, unfortunately, even if you just have a flat budget for OSHA, right now there's cuts in OSHA, but if you just had a flat budget for OSHA, that means fewer and fewer inspectors. And that's what we're hearing around the country, is that there just aren't enough inspectors to be able to either provide compliance assistance or to do this sort of inspection. And so what loses out is you end up not having the sort of targeted investigations and in those industries that are the most hazardous. And so all that OSHA is going to be able to do is respond after the fact, after there's some serious incident or a death or some such thing where they must come out. But really, they need the tools and resources to be able to do those proactive investigations, which actually are helpful to employers because they let them know early on that there's a problem and that they need to take action.
Yeah, but again, you can't have this kind of partnership theory. It's about dominance in my view, and anything that is going to hamper the ability to chase that almighty dollar for some seems to be a bridge too far, Marcy.
Well, again, I agree with you. I really feel that, again, especially for those employers, and we see them too often, that are, scoffing at the law and saying, they're aware that it's a rare event for OSHA to be able to come out, given their lack of resources. That's the place that we're most concerned about, especially for workers that are working in the most hazardous jobs. We see day in and day out workers becoming seriously injured, completely debilitated, and then too many are dying on the job. We've had a spike. I'm here in Massachusetts. We had one of the highest numbers of fatalities this year so far, and we're seeing it all over the country. It's really deeply concerning, and I think family members that now have a hole in their lives without a loved one, a breadwinner, a husband, wife, this isn't something that anybody can take for granted. You really need to invest in worker health and safety in order to see lives saved, and workers be able to thrive, and employers to be able to save, frankly, money and be productive as well. It's really, truly an area where it's a win-win, and that's something that we need to be speaking out about all over the country.
Oh, absolutely. And I've been talking about the fact that if you looked at Trump's skinny budget, one of the things that they completely zeroed out was the Chemical Safety Board. Mm-hmm. And you go, really? Zero that out completely? Yeah, that's a priority.
Well, we just had an explosion in Wisconsin just a few weeks ago. It was at least 4 workers who lost their lives. Isn't there something where we want to know what happened, make sure it never happens again? That's the role of the Chemical Safety Board. That's why they were put into place, to be able to make sure that employers know and workers know what they need in order to not have these extraordinarily dangerous situations.
I mean, at the end of it, does it always have to be a massive tragedy? And look, I look at that explosion in Madison, Wisconsin, and you go, does it have to come to this kind of tragedy? Do we need to have people die before we start going, oh, maybe we should do something? Do bridges need to collapse before we go, oh, we need to do something? Why does it always seem to be we need that headline disaster to move us to action?
Unfortunately, I see it all the time, and even worse, when there is a tragedy, I often see the headline being that it was a freak accident. And, what we try to convey is, no, when a worker dies, there's a pattern and a history. It could be the employer who has a history of safety, of ignoring safety regulations. And it certainly is a history of similar companies not following the law. And we can pinpoint these are the types of safety measures that would prevent this sort of tragedy. And so it's really a situation where we ignore things until not only a tragedy, but it has to be a multiple tragedy, such as the situation in Wisconsin.
Yeah, but you look at this, and this administration, maybe it's me, maybe you've got a better hope than I have, but I see nothing positive for working people coming out of this administration. And the Secretary of Labor, I have little faith in at all.
Well, from my perspective, we have no choice but to bring our voices to the table. So we can't give up. We can't say, "Oh, okay, that's fine. You're never going to change, and you're just going to cut workers' protection." We can't say that. We've got to say we are going to bring working people to the table. We are going to bring families that have lost loved ones and injured workers that no longer work because they've suffered a debilitating injury, and we're going to have those voices brought forward so that the leadership in our country can see that we are not going away, that the communities are going to speak up, and that's what makes change happen. And we can't sit back and say that this is acceptable. In the first round, when the initial Secretary of Labor was put forward, there was an outcry of concern about the nominee, and he's no longer the nominee. And so I do think that when people speak up and express their concerns, that it doesn't always make the change that we're looking for, but it certainly is not going to make the change if people aren't feeling that there's a possibility of a better country.
Yeah, and again, I look at this as one of those issues that I don't think anyone wants to die on the job. I don't think anyone wants to be injured. I think everyone wants safe working conditions, wants people being held accountable, regardless of your political affiliation or ideology.
Absolutely. Worker safety is absolutely a bipartisan issue. OSHA was put forward in an administration that was a Republican administration, so this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. It's a basic human being, working families issue. And I think, again, the more that people who are impacted and have a firsthand experience with what it means to not have a safe working environment, the more that they share that with the federal government, with their representatives, the more that it will rise to the surface as being a priority.
So last line of questioning I've got for you then, what do people do? I mean, I'm a big advocate of labor unions. I'm a big advocate of making sure that your working conditions locally are safe, that you have say on the job, that you deal with those problems there. But in places where they don't, what should people be doing? What are we working on?
Well, around the country, there are obviously unions are the best way for workers to have a really strong voice in the workplace with a collective bargaining agreement. But barring that, there are worker centers and community groups like COSHs, the Coalitions for Occupational Safety and Health, all across the country where they can join these groups and get involved and take action. They can certainly speak to their federal representatives and say, we believe in a strong, healthy economy as well as protections for workers. Don't cut job safety. Fund OSHA, fund the training grants program, fund enforcement, and our investigations like the Chemical Safety Board. So there's a lot that folks can do. They can go to nationalcosh.org to find out if there's a COSH group in their community, and we welcome participation because that's the only way we're going to save lives.
I mean, the life you might save may be your own. I mean, it doesn't get any simpler than that. Marcy, I appreciate you taking time for us. Great talking with you.
So thank you so much. Great to speak with you as well.
Always great talking. Marcy Goldstein Gelb. You can check out their site. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com, or you can follow them, National Kosh, at Twitter. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
It's up to you. Oh, it's a war on the workers. War on the workers. Oh, it's a war on the workers. War on the workers. Oh, it's a war on the workers. And it's time we started calling the shots.
Like rose blossoms, a politician's promises can be beautiful when they burst into full, glorious bloom, only to see them fade over time and, petal by petal, fall away. Take Donald Trump's glorious pledge last year to renegotiate NAFTA and provide a, quote, much better deal for working families. Beautiful. This particular blossom is what convinced many hard-hit former factory workers to vote Trump into the White House. But the bloom is now off Trump's rosy promise, and it looks like working families will get nothing but thorns from him. A recently leaked copy of his NAFTA plan reveals that far from scrapping the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade deal, White House negotiators are goosing it up with even more power for multinational corporations. In particular, it includes new investor incentives to offshore thousands more of our middle-class jobs. Where did this come from? Right out of last year's discredited and defeated Trans-Pacific Partnership, a scam intended to enthrone corporate supremacy over our own laws. Indeed, the 500 corporate executives and lobbyists who essentially wrote that raw TPP deal have quietly been huddling with Trump's team to draft the plan for this new NAFTA. What about those working people Trump promised to help? Locked out, not even allowed to watch the negotiations, much less have a say in them. The same for consumers, environmentalists, farmers, even members of Congress are being left in the dark, allowed no voice in shaping the deal. This is Jim Hightower saying, but I'm guessing that the 6 Goldman Sachs executives Trump brought in to run our economic policy do have a say, along with his daughter and son-in-law who oversee both our government and the extended Trump family's global business empire. It's a same old NAFTA story. Corporate powers are at the table. You and I are on the menu.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
So the Pennsylvania State Senate, evidently they've got Bill 383, which I'm guessing we're gonna make guns in school great again. I'm not sure. Again, I'm not a big fan of more guns in school. I'm not a big fan of more guns everywhere. But I got to be honest, I don't know that in a classroom. I don't know. I'm not sure where that thought is. But here to talk about this latest piece of legislation and maybe what their organization's thoughts on it. I've asked Wythe Keever to come talk with us. He's Assistant Communications Director with the Pennsylvania State Education Association. Wythe, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you. Good morning, Rick.
So walk me through this. What is Senate Bill 383?
Well, Senate Bill 383 is similar to legislation that has been enacted into law in a few other states, which basically sets up a process whereby teachers or other school employees, that includes everyone from the superintendent or principal right down to the custodian, can, with some minimal training, bring their own firearms in school with a concealed carry permit. And the legislation which passed the Pennsylvania State Senate last night by a 28 to 22 vote is modeled on those types of bills. It creates some training requirements and a new level of bureaucracy for school districts. But the bottom line is that it brings more guns into schools, and it does not make students and staff safer. It puts them more at risk.
So, are we in favor of more guns in the classroom? I mean, little Johnny Susie gets out of hand. You got some backup.
Let's be clear, Rick. There's a lot of people who are gun owners and responsible gun owners.
Certainly.
I respect that. I think all of our members respect that. The key question here is what makes and keeps students and school staff safe. And 2 state government task forces have studied this issue. That they brought in experts from law enforcement and education, and the conclusion that they both reached was this type of bill does not keep schools safer. It actually increases risk. There's a lot of emotion behind this, and we all understand that the tragic incidents that happened at the Sandy Hook Elementary in Connecticut and Columbine in Colorado. But many of the unintended consequences of a bill like this might be, for instance, students gaining access to a teacher's firearm that wasn't properly secured, or accidental shootings, accidental discharges of weapons. It also creates problems for first responders. If a first responder is dispatched to a school where there's an armed confrontation taking place, the first responders may not be able to identify who the perpetrator is and who the school staff are, and basically would have to treat anyone with a firearm as a potential perpetrator. So it would not only cause delays, it put more children and school staff at risk, and that's why we oppose this.
I mean, I look at this, and again, the idea of more bullets flying around just means more people possibly catching one of those bullets. And it just seems a bad idea to me. And the idea of more guns in school, just to me is a bad idea all the way around. There are some common sense things we could do. I mean, a lot of schools, they do a good job of securing the building. There could be other things, I think, other than, having teachers who got into teaching because they love kids and they love teaching, not because they wanted to be armed guards.
Well, you're exactly right, Rick. Teachers didn't go into education to become armed guards and police school buildings and grounds with firearms. Their primary responsibility is teaching children. Now, many school districts employ either school security or school resource officers who are appropriately trained and are appropriately trained to carry firearms in a school environment. We're fine with that. We think that that's okay that appropriately trained school safety officers be employed in school districts. So this is not about being opposed to the use of guns in all situations. It's just that this is the wrong approach. Arming teachers or education support professionals or other school staff, their primary responsibility is to be educating students. So that's why this is the wrong approach.
Yeah, I mean, for me, where I come from is a place of more guns are not the answers. Even if you live in a place where there might be a grizzly bear walking around, if you remember Betsy DeVos's rationale for the need for more guns.
Well, I think that's, and I had to chuckle when you said about Betsy DeVos. There are a lot of people who have strong feelings about safety and about guns and who are responsible gun owners. We respect that. Yeah. But in terms of how to properly keep a school facility safe, this is not the way to go. I had the privilege yesterday of communicating with a teacher from Newtown, Connecticut, who was a survivor of the Sandy Hook shooting. And she and her other colleagues who survived that horrible tragedy actually wrote to Pennsylvania State Senate. And I have a copy of her letter. I think it's really interesting reading. Could I share a little bit with you?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. This is a teacher from Newtown, Connecticut, and a survivor of the Sandy Hook Elementary, and these are her words describing the Sandy Hook shooting. as the gunman burst in with an AR-15, we were taking care of terrified children behind closed doors, listening to 154 gunshots unleashed in 5 minutes in the classrooms and hallway of our elementary school. We did not know where the perpetrator was or how many there were, and it's completely unrealistic to think that an educator with a gun would have been able to take down the gunman without interfering with law enforcement's response. And this is a key statement she makes in her letter. This is not the movies. In 5 minutes, 26 people were dead in our school, 20 first graders and 6 adults. Unsecured guns carried by individuals could be left unattended or accidentally discharged or wrestled away from the carrier, and all of those pose significant risks to children and adults alike. So these are the words of someone who actually lived through a horrific shooting in a school setting. And her words tell it far more strongly than I could that this is just a bad idea. I'm sure there are people who envision a scenario, and you hear this from gun advocates all the time about good guys with guns taking down bad guys with guns. But if you look at Columbine or look at Virginia Tech or Fort Hood, Texas, or Columbine, there were armed security and police, and in the case of Fort Hood, it was a military base. Even in those situations, there was difficulty to identify and stop an active shooter. So we really need to change the conversation. We need to change to find ways to keep guns out of schools, except in the hands of appropriately trained school resource officers or school security personnel. The answer to keeping schools safe is not more guns, it's less.
Yeah, you know, the part where this isn't the movies, I think that's important to point out to people, because you're right. I can't tell you how many gun nut friends have given me their erotic X-rated fantasy of pulling out their big gun and taking out a bad guy. Because they've idealized all this, they've romanticized it to the point where, you know, it is a movie that they constantly run through their heads, and I think that narrative plays here.
Well, again, the actual witness accounts of Sandy Hook and Columbine describe chaos and confusion, and not knowing where the perpetrators are or who the perpetrators were, and so, you know, yes. Very key. This is not the movies. This is not Clint Eastwood striding down a dusty Western movie set. It's a very confusing situation, and law enforcement officials basically reaffirm the same thing, that the use of deadly force in an armed confrontation requires extensive and ongoing training. The training that they're talking about with this bill is just that a teacher would meet the same kind of training requirements that, for example, a municipal police officer might. Well, that's really not sufficient. Even within law enforcement, there's very specialized training for this kind of scenario. And again, the unintended consequences that can happen, particularly if students were to gain access to a firearm that a teacher or another school staff person didn't properly secure, that's just posing a significant risk. It's increasing the danger in a school environment.
So what do we do? Last question I've got for you, because I'm sure there are a lot of parents out there like I am who go, look, you know, this stuff happens. And we want to do everything we can to prevent it, but adding a gun to a classroom where kids are all around, especially young ones who are constantly touching teachers and stuff, the chance that something unfortunate could happen just seems to rise the more you put us in this situation. So what do we, the parents, do? What do we do?
Well, I think number one is teachers and parents and grandparents and taxpayers need to make their voices heard. We need to speak up. In the case of Pennsylvania, although this legislation has passed the state Senate, does not necessarily mean it's going to become law. The House of Representatives has yet to indicate whether they plan to take up the measure. Governor Wolf has already indicated he opposes the measure and has indicated he would veto it if it reached his desk. So there's opportunity for people to speak up, make your voices heard.
Again, back to reaching out to your representatives and reach out and touch somebody, but in a good way. And thank goodness for Governor Wolf, another reason why 2018 so important here in Pennsylvania. I appreciate the time. I appreciate the thoughts. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Rick.
Always great talking with you. Wythe Keever. He's the assistant communications director there at the Pennsylvania State Education Association. You want to check out their website, psea.org. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
It's easy to imagine there will be sorrow. Yeah, there will be sorrow. And there will be sorrow no more.
The Rick Smith Show, changing America for the better.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1936. Jesus Polares, a Chicano miner and union organizer, was deported from the United States. He was charged with having communist sympathies and declared an undesirable alien. At the time he was deported, Polares had been in the United States for more than 20 years. He found work in New Mexico as a coal miner. He first stood up to the mine bosses in Gallup, New Mexico. When he dared to speak out against the company, he was fired. He then went to Madrid, New Mexico, where he became involved in union organizing. There again, he was fired for speaking out, evicted from his company home, and blacklisted. Polares recognized that Chicano mine workers needed to stand strong. He helped to found the Liga Obrera de Habla Española, or the League of Spanish-Speaking Workers. The organization quickly gathered members around northern New Mexico and southern Colorado. It grew from a few hundred miners to more than 8,000 strong. Then in 1935, the miners went on strike in Gallup. Martial law was declared. 300 miners and their families were evicted from their homes. When a warrant was served on one miner to throw them out of their homes, others blocked the doors in an effort to stop the eviction. They were arrested for breaking and entering. Protesters converged on the jail and were met with tear gas. The sheriff and his deputies opened fire on the protesters. The fight left one sheriff and 2 miners dead. In the aftermath, Polares was jailed for his role as a labor leader. He was deported, along with more than 100 other Chicano miners. Deportation was a tool used to stifle organizing amongst Latino workers. Liga Obrera never recovered from the loss of its leaders. The organization lost strength and momentum. But Liga Obrera is proof that workers can organize and fight for a better tomorrow. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Show.com. So the big travel ban today goes into effect. Thanks, stolen Supreme Court seat. Good. Hey, you knew it was coming. You knew it was coming when they got away with the Grand Theft SCOTUS. Anyway, here to talk about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and around the world. Victoria Jones, Talk Media News. Victoria, travel ban tonight. Tell me about it.
Yes, tonight, as I think it was Rod Stewart sang, actually. Well, and then the next line was, "It'll be all right."
No.
And I no. Well, I think that's what many immigration lawyers are probably saying today. No. Basically, what's happened is the State Department issued guidance to embassies and consulates around the world late last night in a cable, and defined close family. And that is how people from applying for visas from these 6 mostly Muslim countries during the period of the ban, and for refugees, will be allowed to come, be counted. Now, the Supreme Court didn't define it that way. They defined it as bona fide. So a credible claim of a bona fide relationship or entity in the United States. But the meaning of bona fide relationship wasn't precisely explained. So State Department decided to explain it for them. And so they did in some detail. So half-siblings, step-siblings, but not nieces or nephews, sons and daughters-in-law, but not brothers and sisters-in-law, your mother-in-law, but not your grandparents. So it's very, it's very
kind of slapdash. Kind of just,
Yeah.
It was a good dart game last night, huh?
Yeah, I mean, what was that? What was that Meryl Streep film where she had to? I do it with my cat sometimes. Don't ask me to. The Meryl Streep film where she had to choose between her children.
Yeah, I don't know, but.
Anyway, it's like that. Don't ask me to pick between you, but they got to pick. It's. I think it's going to be challenged very, very quickly by immigration lawyers, because some people are raised by their grandparents, are very close to their grandparents, and fiancés. No, they are not considered close relationships.
But mother-in-law is.
Oh, your mother-in-law, that's very close.
Really? Yeah. I think they bring the mother-in-law just to torture you.
I think they've done this. It's like, really, mother-in-law? This is just extraordinary. This is fascinating. But your brother-in-law, the brother-in-law who's the one who can fix your car, no, you can't have your brother-in-law.
No, this is for TV ratings, Victoria. This is for TV ratings. We need the ratings. Mother-in-laws cause tension, so there's ratings there.
Unbelievable. This is going to be fascinating. And the Supreme Court did not say close. It's really fascinating. So, and of course, fiancés, they don't want all those Russian mail-order brides coming in. Well, I guess they're not Russian. I guess they're Yemeni mail-order brides, sight unseen. But, yeah, they don't want them. But, this is quite complicated because a lot of people do come in genuinely on fiancé visas, and they have met, they've had long relationships, and then they go back and they come in on the fiancé visa. Well, now you can't come in for the period of the ban.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is there a big market for mail order brides from Yemen? I'm not up on that, so I'm just curious.
I don't know. I think you could probably start one.
All right. I'm not interested in starting one, but I'm just curious if there was a big market for that. You never know.
I suspect not. I think I just invented it.
So there's a new Twitter hashtag. There you go. Let's move on. The healthcare thing. Some are saying dead. Some are saying new plan. What are you hearing?
Well, there was a very lively lunch yesterday in the Senate, Republicans only.
Of course.
And there are more meetings going on, but they're only among Republicans. And they're basically trying to get something. Mitch McConnell and John Cornyn, he's the chief whip, they want something by Friday. They want to get a new Congressional Budget Office score, which is going to give them better numbers than $28 million being thrown off health care. But the problem is that the moderates and the conservatives in the Republican caucus in the Senate, they are not agreeing about this at all. And they were at it hammer and tongs yesterday. Susan Collins taking on Ted Cruz, which I would have liked to see myself.
That could have been on pay-per-view.
It could have been on pay-per-view because, he fancied himself. He did the debating at Princeton, but she doesn't back down.
No, it's interesting because you point out the chasm there. You've got some who are saying it's horrible and they can't support it, but you've got the Rand Pauls, the Ted Cruz, the Lees, and Johnson from Wisconsin saying it's not horrible enough. That's the reason we're not going along with it. It's got to be worse, right. Victoria.
Right. Mike Lee basically, if you can strip it, he wants it stripped. Same with Rand Paul. If you can strip it, he wants it stripped. And Collins is saying you're throwing people off. You're throwing poor people off health care, and I'm not having it. Now, what they might try and do, I don't know, but I think what they might try and do is maybe, this is one option, is try and keep some provisions carve off a Democrat or two. Who would you carve off?
Joe
carve
Manchin.
off Joe Manchin. Yes.
Heitkamp, they're your two.
Heitkamp, I think, might be tougher to carve off than Manchin.
But everybody agrees Manchin. I mean, he's he might as well just put an R behind his name already. Come out of the closet. You can do it.
Yeah, because if they did something on Medicaid for West Virginia, that's a possible. I mean, Collins is not just looking at Medicaid for Maine. She's looking at Medicaid for the entire United States, and that is her concern. She used to be in charge of Medicaid for the state of Maine. This is a topic that she actually knows what she's talking about.
Right.
And she, she's an expert. There are people in the Senate who are actually experts and know what they're talking about. She's actually an expert in this area. Whether you agree with her views or not, she knows what she's talking about.
You're right.
Looked at the bill.
But here's the thing, you go back to this has become one of those rhetorical wars, depending on which side of the divide you're on, and experts don't matter anymore. We don't believe in facts, Victoria. Everything she knows is an alternative fact.
Well, to some extent, but I do think that she knows some things that are facts. I think if you had her in the studio and sat down with her, you would find that some of the things that she knows are surprisingly facts. I don't think that she's I don't think that she's full of nonsense. I really don't. But the thing is there a possibility here that this bill could be thrown out with that baby that you're throwing out with the bathwater because it can't get health insurance, and bring in the Democrats to fix the Affordable Care Act? Is that a possibility?
No. I don't think it's a possibility because they can't go back to their districts and say, we promised you we were going to repeal it, and then actually fixed it, which they should have been doing over the last 7 years anyway. I don't see how they can do it, but it'll be interesting to see what happens by tomorrow. And it's odd to me. And again, you're talking about people who were screaming for years about how fast the Republicans or how fast the Democrats ram this down our throats, with hundreds of hearings and months of debate, only to say, by Friday, like a school deadline. Got to have your book report in by Friday.
Oh, it was going to happen instantly. It was like on the first day this was going to be done. And Orrin Hatch is saying, that a lot of Republicans are getting ticked off with the conservatives for objecting to everything. And Orrin Hatch is saying, if they keep this up, we're going to get single payer.
And I like that idea. Let's do that.
It could happen.
That seems rational to me. And finally, evidently Trump back on the Twitters this morning.
He was on the Twitters this morning. Now, he claims that he no longer watches Morning Joe, so you decide for yourself whether you believe that. But he sent out a two-part tweet. He heard, poorly rated at Morning Joe speaks badly of me, don't watch anymore. Then he went on to hit Mika Brzezinski. How come low IQ crazy Mika, along with Psycho Joe, came to Mar-a-Lago 3 nights in a row around New Year's Eve and insisted on joining me? She was bleeding badly from a facelift. I said no. This is the President of the United States.
Are you? This is just kind of a bad comment section on some idiotic article.
She was bleeding badly from a facelift.
Bleeding
I
badly.
said no.
What is this with women and bleeding?
I don't know. She responded shortly after in her own tweet with a photo of a Cheerios box detailing a child and the slogan, "Made for little hands."
Oh, wow. Yeah, this is exactly what we need while we're talking about kicking 22 million, 23 million, however million people off of health insurance, the fact that thousands of people are going to die. Yeah, this is exactly what I want the president of my United States. This is the kind of banter I want to see.
It's fascinating, but he says don't watch anymore. So it wasn't like he was spending his morning watching the show.
It's crazy.
No.
Victoria, appreciate the time.
Thank you so much.
Great talking to you. Victoria Jones, Talk Media News. Quick break. Right back.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham.
Working people brought this bill to a screeching halt. We mobilized in record time, and we're not about to stand down.
AFL-CIO President Rich Trumka on the stalled Republican Senate health care bill. Labor isn't letting up in its campaign to stop this bill.
We're running ads. We're flooding Senate offices with phone calls. We're mobilizing in the states. We're going all out. It's time for Congress to abandon this reckless plan and come together on a bipartisan basis to improve the Affordable Care Act. That's what voters want.
Trumka says the AFL-CIO isn't fooled by what Trump and his Republicans are doing with this so-called health care bill.
Make no mistake, this bill isn't a health care plan at all. It's a massive transfer of wealth from workers to Wall Street. It obliterates Medicaid. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, it will increase the number of uninsured Americans by 22 million, and it cuts taxes for millionaires while it raises taxes on hardworking men and women who have negotiated high-quality health care. This bill is a sham, and it's a shame. So working families are fighting back. We're fighting for our children, our parents, and our community. This is a vicious, vicious assault on America's health care security.
Sandra Falwell is a D.C. registered nurse and a member of National Nurses United.
This bill poses a mortal threat to the health and well-being of our country. As registered nurses, we recognize that this is an extremely mean-spirited and callous bill that would substantially harm our patients. Instead of kicking tens of millions of people off of health insurance, we need to move forward to the only system that will guarantee that everyone has access to safe therapeutic health care, a single-payer Medicare for all.
For Zahara Heckscher, a breast cancer survivor being treated with very expensive medicines, the GOP health care bill is life-threatening.
Health insurance means that I can do the treatments that my doctors think is best, take the modern medicines that my doctors think are going to extend my life as long as possible.
7 government employee unions oppose privatization of America's air traffic control system. Republicans in the House version of the FAA reauthorization bill included privatization. The unions, including AFGE, AFSCME, and the National Association of Government Employees, say that, quote, overhauling the entire aviation system by removing air traffic control from federal oversight and funding will be a serious setback for its development and growth. End quote. WIN is brought to you in part by the Amalgamated Transit Union, the largest labor union representing transit and allied workers in the U.S. and Canada. Online at atu.org. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
Everybody, let's get into it. Get stoked, get it started, get it started, get it started. Let's get it started.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So while the horrible healthcare bill may not look like it's going to pass, and look, they still got till Friday to dream up something just as dangerous and ugly and horrible. But it looks like they're going to go away to recess. They're going to go back to their districts and dream up what next to assault. And look, the next attack is going to be the budget. While this healthcare bill, not healthcare, while this is about massive tax cuts, the next thing, the budget, really going to be about more for the 1%. And here to talk about the budget and what we can expect, what we need to be doing, what we need to be focusing on, Harry Stein, Director of Fiscal Policy there at the Center for American Progress. Harry, thanks for taking time for us.
Good to be on the program.
So massive tax cuts in the healthcare bill, massive tax cuts in the budget, and of course, massive tax cuts down the road. At what point do we get to pay for anything?
Well, what they're going to be doing is, like you say, first they come for health care, and then in the budget it's going to be everything else. And in both cases, the health care cuts and the cuts to everything else in the budget, things like disability benefits and nutrition assistance, all of that is going to be about paying for tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. Right. And that's the whole reason that it seems like they're doing a budget, that they want to do a budget for this year, is to pass tax cuts and to do that through a process called reconciliation, which is how they're doing health care right now. And the important thing to understand about reconciliation is that they can pass the legislation without any Democratic votes in the Senate. It's a way of avoiding a filibuster. So it's a way to ram through partisan legislation. That's what they're trying to do on health care. It's what they'll do next on the budget.
Now, it's amazing to me. It took 60 votes to pass the Affordable Care Act. It's only going to take 50 to destroy it.
Right. So it's actually interesting. With the Affordable Care Act, there were actually two bills. They passed a bill with 60 votes, and then when they amended the bill at the same time that they passed the Affordable Care Act, they actually amended it through reconciliation. So the bulk of the bill was passed with 60 votes, but then reconciliation was used to tweak it. This was after Scott Brown had won the Senate seat and Democrats lost their 60-vote majority. But you're absolutely right. Even though it took 60 votes to lay the architecture of the Affordable Care Act, it really only takes 50 to take it away. And the reason for that is that what they're basically doing is taking away all of the support that people get through the architecture of the Affordable Care Act to get health insurance. And they're also, of course, cutting the taxes for the wealthy that were meant to pay for the law.
At some point, when do we, as a nation, wake up to the reality that this tax cut fetish, because everything seems to be about tax cuts. Every policy, everything that the Republicans bring us is about, we're going to do this, but we're going to give massive tax cuts to people who don't really need it, or in most cases don't even really want it.
Yeah, it's really remarkable how everything that's being pushed this year has been about cutting taxes for the wealthy, and even things that it seems like that would be so irrelevant to the conversation. First and foremost, a health care debate. Why are we talking about cutting taxes for the wealthy in a health care debate? But you saw that also in the even the Trump child care plan and infrastructure plan are really just tax giveaways for the wealthy and corporate investors. It's kind of staggering that it seems like this is just any policy area. The answer that we're getting from Trump and his friends in Congress is tax cuts for the wealthy. I get the sense that there's a little bit of a waking up to this. I don't know how real this is, but we have heard from some of the Republicans in the Senate saying, well, hold on, why are we cutting taxes for the wealthy in this bill? Now, I don't know if at the end of the day they'll actually vote no or not. I hope they do. But there does seem to be some recognition that this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to voters, at least.
Well, I would argue it's because it's who they are. It's the only tool that they have in their toolbox. And if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So the fix to everything, the panacea to the utopian world is the rich pay no taxes. And, well, if 20 million people don't get health insurance, hey, it was their choice.
I think that's right. It's the old makers and takers rhetoric that we'd hear from people like Paul Ryan. I think that there is this view that the way to solve all of our problems is to make it easier for rich people to keep more of their money.
And again, even that, it's more of their money. But at the end of the day, I keep saying, look, they needed workers, they needed government, they needed infrastructure, they needed all these things to make that money. At the end of the day, you don't get to not pay your workers. You don't get to not invest in infrastructure. You don't get to not pay for education and then end up taking all of the wealth from that. It seems insane to me, but yet the conversation isn't in that realm at all.
No, and that's absolutely right. People's success in this country is built on the society that we've built, and a lot of that is things like healthcare, education, infrastructure, and what we see from the Trump budget is just completely stepping back from having any investment in those sectors. Really stepping back from trying to have good public education, and even where there was during the campaign, I think some rhetoric that supported infrastructure from now President Trump. That's not what he's pushing as president, and it's I suppose disappointing, but it's also clarifying that was really not the agenda. But if we're going to have a society where people are able to get ahead, not just the wealthy, but everybody, you need to invest in these things, and we don't talk about that enough when we think about taxes and the relationship between taxes and economic growth. People always think about, I think that the Republican frame on this, that any tax is an attack on human freedom and it's going to be destroy the economy, and we know of course that's not true. And the reason that that's not true is that taxes pay for things like education and infrastructure, scientific research, and the things that we all know that we need to have a strong and growing economy. So when we're thinking about taxes, we ought to be thinking about the investments that those taxes pay for.
Exactly. I mean, I look at Massachusetts, the WBUR just came out with a poll yesterday that pointed out that like 81% of the people in Massachusetts think that they should raise their state income tax on people making over $1 million a year. And I think that's a sane, rational perspective. We want to make sure people get health care. We want to make sure kids get educated. We want to make sure that we have safe neighborhoods. There are things as a society we need, we want. We should be able to pay for those things.
Absolutely. And consistently the result that you get when you ask the American people this, and by the way, this is true not just of Democrats, but also independents and even Republicans, is that they support higher taxes on the wealthy and on corporations. And when you ask people, what's your biggest concern about the tax system? The biggest concern that you hear, what I think I would have expected, is people would be concerned that they're paying too much in taxes. I mean, I think that, you kind of expect that based on what you see in the media and this sort of sense that, that taxes are always this bad thing. But that's actually not true. That's not where most of the American people are. The biggest concern that you hear about the tax system is that some wealthy people and some corporations are not paying their fair share. That's what people want when they hear tax reform. That's not what the Trump budget and what the Congress in their budget is setting up. That's not the tax reform that they're contemplating. They're contemplating more giveaways for the wealthy and corporations. But real tax reform, what people want is to see the wealthy and corporations pay their fair share.
So let me ask you this then, because if that's completely accurate, and I don't disagree, I don't not believe what you're saying. If that were the case, why is it that all of these anti-tax pledge taking Republicans keep getting reelected and keep bringing us things like this health care bill, which is a massive redistribution of wealth from poor and disabled and children to already wildly wealthy? Why is the budget, which is going to slash programs like LIHEAP and Meals on Wheels, and thus giving massive tax breaks to the wealthy, why did these people still get elected?
Well, it's an excellent question, and I think to some degree, we've been talking about this agenda for years, and we've seen the Ryan budgets for years. But up until this year, they were always somewhat hypothetical exercises because we had Barack Obama as president, and we kind of knew that they would never actually get a chance. They wouldn't actually have a chance to do it.
Right.
And this year is different. I think that this year has been clarifying, I hope, for voters, that this is really the agenda. I think this is the first time that it's really being taken seriously as something that could actually happen to the country. And I think people are noticing how damaging that would be. Now, as to the question of, why do they keep pushing this and how do they keep getting reelected? I think it's also the polling here is really fascinating. As I said, across Democrats, Republicans, independents, people think that the wealthy ought to be paying more taxes, and they oppose tax cuts for the wealthy. There was polling after the 2012 election where the question of whether to extend the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy was a big issue, and Republicans didn't even want to do it. Republican voters said, no, I don't want to keep cutting taxes for the wealthy. But if you just looked in, if you just zoomed in on Republicans who donated to a political campaign and who made more than $250,000 a year, so the Republican donor class of voters, but a pretty limited swath of people, that subset was very supportive of continuing the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy. And I think that they've really taken control of the agenda.
So it's a money in politics thing. It's yesterday Donald Trump had a $10 million fundraiser for his 2020 campaign. So that's it, right?
Right. I think when people surround themselves with wealthy campaign donors, and that's who's calling the shots. And the Koch brothers just had their retreat that had a lot of lawmakers attending that. The thing that people missed with the Trump budget, which was extreme and awful, but there was this really misguided view that, well, this is so out of the mainstream that this has to be dead on arrival, and it's really not. And I think that's what we're going to see when the Congress moves to their budget after healthcare is dealt with in one way or another. I expect to see a budget from the House and maybe and probably also from the Senate potentially, and then an agenda following that budget that looks a lot like the Trump budget. And that budget, as we said, the whole point of that budget is to create what we call a reconciliation process to pass partisan legislation without any Democratic votes. And that's really just going to be a Trojan horse to pass the most controversial cuts in the Trump budget, the cuts to nutrition assistance and the tax cuts for the wealthiest people, the cuts to programs for people with disabilities, the tax cuts for corporations. I mean, all of these things are going to be enabled by this budget resolution. And so when people say, well, the Trump budget was so nuts, it's got to be dead on arrival, it's really not. And I think we'll see that very clearly when Congress turns to its budget.
Yeah, well, again, I don't call it the Trump budget. It's the Ryan budget.
It's
the Heritage
absolutely.
Foundation budget. This is who they are. And the reason I asked, why, this is who they've told us they are for almost a generation now. And only now we're waking up to the reality of they've been telling us this is who they are. And now this is who they are?
I think that's right. This has been the agenda for some time now. The 2016 election, I think it was really there were so many. It was very hard to get people to pay attention to what would happen substantively. What would the policy implications of the election be? And I think a lot of people felt like after seeing gridlock for so long under President Obama and a Republican Congress that had no interest in working with President Obama on anything, and they got used to thinking that the gridlock was just a state of nature, that we always were going to have gridlock because that's just how it is. And that's not the case. There was some stories written, but very little, I think, recognition of what, taking this agenda seriously, what does it actually mean for people? And what I think we're seeing after the election, now that this is becoming real, is a growing recognition that these kinds of cuts, when they're talking about taking away health care from 22 million people, taking away protections for pre-existing conditions, cutting funding for things like Meals on Wheels, and then doing all this to cut taxes for the wealthy, this is really an agenda that's a direct threat to the lives and livelihoods of ordinary people. This is not some abstract debate that takes place in Washington but really doesn't matter outside of Washington. I mean, this is something that really is fundamental to the pocketbooks of families across the country. And are they going to have things like food on the table and health care and education? And more, I think that is coming through, that this is real. This is a very real threat, and we need to take this policy very seriously. This isn't a hypothetical exercise anymore, where there's a scary Ryan budget, but he can pass it in the House, but it's not going to happen. He has a president who, as you said, basically made the Ryan budget his own budget.
Yeah, because he didn't want to do the work of actually writing his own budget. And I look at that policy after policy. There's nothing that comes out of this White House, in my view, that Trump actually knows anything about. He just, this sounds like a good idea. Let's move it along. But here's the thing. You go back to, you're taking health care away from all these people. The frame from the right wing is, well, these people, they chose not to buy it. They should have the choice not to have insurance, Harry.
Right. And this is, just a bizarre kind of conception of what I suppose we think of. I think most people, when they think of freedom, that means freedom to not, be terrified of contracting an illness and being driven into bankruptcy by the costs, or not being able to access medical care. The thing about the healthcare debate that I think is really important here is, when we say 22 million people lose health insurance, or the people with pre-existing conditions won't be covered, or that insurance won't actually be there for you when you're sick, even if you do have insurance, this is not some abstract world that we have to really struggle to contemplate. this was the world a few years ago before the ACA. People used to go bankrupt all the time because of medical expenses, because they unexpectedly got sick. And oftentimes, and a lot of those people had health insurance, but the health insurance wasn't there for them when they needed it. And you know, that's something I think that a lot of voters remember. That's not some abstract world. And so I don't think that people are going to be fooled by this sort of view of freedom, I suppose, that is essentially just the world before the Affordable Care Act, where people didn't know if their insurance was going to be there for them when they were sick, when people went bankrupt due to high medical costs, and when you had just more and more people every year going without health insurance. And now we've driven the uninsured rate to a historic low, but that's not going to continue if we pass the bills that are being considered in the Senate now to repeal the Affordable Care Act.
Now we're going back to the future where we had 50 million plus uninsured. And as you pointed out, you know, I know a family who 2 kids got leukemia. They were just young girls. They lost everything. They both had really good jobs. They both maxed out their insurance because caps were at $1 million, and that got eaten through almost immediately. They couldn't find other insurance. It was a horrible nightmare. And it seems where we're going, evidently where we are going back to as a society. Sad stuff. Harry, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Always great talking with you.
Good talking to you too.
Always good. Harry Stein, Director of Fiscal Policy there at the Center for American Progress. You want to check out their stuff? AmericanProgress.org, the website. Quick break, right back. Stick around. Listen to the Rick Smith Show.
And take money. All they want to do is and take money. All they want to do is and take money. All they want to do is and take money.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day that American folklorist Archie Green was born in Winnipeg, Canada. His father was a Ukrainian refugee who had fought in the 1905 Russian Revolution. As a young boy, his family moved to Los Angeles. There, he enjoyed listening to cowboy songs on the radio. Archie grew up to become a shipwright and a carpenter, but he never forgot those cowboy songs. At the age of 40, he returned to college at the University of Illinois to study labor history. He wanted to learn about the songs and the stories at the heart of the U.S. labor movement. He was interested in what he dubbed labor lore, the folklore of working people. For 7 years, Archie led the effort to get Congress to pass the American Folklife Preservation Act. Finally, in 1976, Congress unanimously supported the act. The act allowed for the founding of the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. The center helps to collect the stories of the working class. Archie wrote books and essays about workers, including miners, tinsmiths, millwrights, and the Sailors Union of the Pacific. In 2007, he helped to edit the Big Red Songbook. The book includes the lyrics of nearly 200 labor songs. These songs had been included in various editions of the Little Red Songbooks published by the industrial workers of the world between 1909 and 1973. Archie Green understood that workers' stories deserved to be remembered and told. He spent 5 decades as a scholar and advocate for these stories. His work has helped to preserve the record of working class life in America for generations to come. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Harry brings up something that I think is extremely important to remember. You go back to pre-ACA and the conditions, 50 plus million uninsured families living in terror of, hey, I could lose my health insurance. And I think of one family in particular whom we got to meet through doing some of the events around the ACA that we did. We showed the movie Sicko. We had some brought people together and experts and panels and all that stuff. And, she shared with us, her horrible story, which was they had twin daughters, and they both had a rare kind of cancer. And almost immediately, the $1 million cap was met. Almost immediately, they ended up having to find other jobs. They ended up filing bankruptcy, almost losing everything because their daughters got sick. Now, as I understand today, the daughters are doing well, thriving, have moved past that. And, I'm sure you asked them, it was absolutely well worth it, because it is. But what family should have to go through that? While your child is fighting for their lives, you're arguing with insurance companies to make sure that this treatment is covered or this test is covered or really? Is that what we want in this country? Now, you stop and you think about it yourself. Imagine, you get sick. Do you want to be, going through chemotherapy if you've got cancer? Having to argue with some bureaucrat on the phone who, it's not their fault. It's not. The person who's on the phone talking to you, they didn't make the policy. They're just a poor schmuck who's got to figure out how to make a living and get care for themselves if they get sick. They don't like it any more than you do. But they're the ones who, they got to tell you. Because that's the policy of the place that you got your insurance from. I mean, at some point, do we not, as a society, say enough is enough already? I mean, at some point, do we not get a little angry, get a little frustrated, and say, no, we don't want to go back? I mean, because I look at this stuff, man, it's just terrible. Just terrible. And I think about a guy I used to work with. Again, that cap. We had the best insurance you could get, but even they had a $1 million cap. His wife had a heart attack. His son had leukemia. No more insurance. Sorry. That's it. We're done paying for it. All gone. Do we want to go back to that? To the days of caps and rescission? Pre-existing, I mean, really. I mean, and what's frustrating to me is I've been saying this about the Republican leadership for a very long time. This is who they are. They have told us for almost a generation who they are. Are we surprised by this just obscene legislation that's come out? Are you surprised by the budget that zeroes out LIHEAP, that ends heating assistance for poor seniors? Are you surprised by that? Are you surprised in the cut? Now remember, this is Ronald Reagan's party, the guy who said ketchup's a vegetable and cut school lunch programs so kids go hungry in the summertime. This is not new. This is who they are. It's all about feeding the wealth class. It's all about more power, control, money, you name it. For them and well for us, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You chose not to get health insurance. You chose not to go and get an education. You chose not to live in a safe neighborhood. You chose not to have your kids go to the best school in your neighborhood. You chose. And we hear a lot of nonsense from them on choice, right? Well, you should have choice. You kidding? Scary times, my friends. Scary times. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. When we come back, a little bit more on the healthcare bill, this time from a senior citizen perspective. Max Richmond's going to be here talking about how this is going to affect Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. How's it going to affect the senior community? Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
I'll never bend. I'm with you now until the end.
Thought-provoking, intelligent conversation with a heart. The voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
Like rose blossoms, a politician's promises can be beautiful when they burst into full, glorious bloom, only to see them fade over time and petal by petal fall away. Take Donald Trump's glorious pledge last year to renegotiate NAFTA and provide a, quote, much better deal for working families. Beautiful. This particular blossom is what convinced many hard-hit former factory workers to vote Trump into the White House. But the bloom is now off Trump's rosy promise, and it looks like working families will get nothing but thorns from him. A recently leaked copy of his NAFTA plan reveals that far from scrapping the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade deal, White House negotiators are goosing it up with even more power for multinational corporations. In particular, it includes new investor incentives to offshore thousands more of our middle-class jobs. Where did this come from? Right out of last year's discredited and defeated Trans-Pacific Partnership, a scam intended to enthrone corporate supremacy over our own laws. Indeed, the 500 corporate executives and lobbyists who essentially wrote that raw TPP deal have quietly been huddling with Trump's team to draft the plan for this new NAFTA. What about those working people Trump promised to help? Locked out, not even allowed to watch the negotiations, much less have a say in them. The same for consumers, environmentalists, farmers, even members of Congress are being left in the dark, allowed no voice in shaping the deal. This is Jim Hightower saying, but I'm guessing that the 6 Goldman Sachs executives Trump brought in to run our economic policy do have a say, along with his daughter and son-in-law who oversee both our government and the extended Trump family's global business empire. It's a same old NAFTA story. Corporate powers are at the table. You and I are on the menu.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
But the fact
Vice
is,
President Cheney, though, said it's not a Ponzi scheme. You say it is.
Absolutely. If Vice President Cheney or anyone else says that the program that we have in place today and young people who are paying into that expect that program to be sound and for them to receive benefits when they reach retirement age, that is just a lie. And I don't care what anyone says. We know that. The American people know that. But more importantly, those 25 and 30-year-olds know that.
Yes, it's all just a Ponzi scheme. It's all just a rip-off. It's not going to be there. They keep hammering that. And again, I keep coming back to the reality is, Obamacare is not failing. They've helped destroy it. Social Security has some problems, but again, you go back to who caused those problems. Medicare's got some problems, but again, how did we get here? All of these right-wing policies, all of this destroy agenda. And you got Paul Ryan, who's just thrilled at the fact that, you know what, they're going to cut half of Medicaid through this healthcare scheme and through the tax cut that the budget plan that they've proposed. Question is this what we the people want? And I got to be honest, I sure hope not. And I look at the statement by John Scott at Fox News, who said if millions of people don't have health insurance, it's kind of the American way. Not my America, friend. Anyway, here to talk about this. Really just this horrible tax cut healthcare plan. I've asked Max Richmond to come talk with us. He's the CEO of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Max, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you for inviting me to the program.
I got to be honest, I'm really just furious when I see what this Republican Party is trying to do to Medicaid and eventually what they're going to do to Medicare and Social Security. I mean, it's not who we are, and it's not the American way.
I was listening to your opening, and it reminded me of a particular aspect of this debate, and that is on Medicare. We've been hearing mostly about the Medicaid, which is an assistance program, not an insurance program, the way Medicare is. But on Medicare, which hasn't gotten a whole lot of attention, there are a couple of kind of under the radar issues in both the House bill and in the Senate bill. The 12 years of extension of solvency on the Medicare program through the Affordable Care Act, largely by virtue of a very tiny 0.9% payroll tax on those individuals making over $200,000 a year or $250,000 a couple, that's eliminated. That money is no longer able to be applied to the Medicare Part A trust fund. The result being that the trust fund becomes insolvent sooner.
Yep.
And going along with what your opening was, how did we get here? I hate to get into conspiracy theories these days in Washington, but once this happens, you can just envision Speaker Ryan making the case that, well, we've got to cut Medicare because they're running out of money. Why are they running out of money? Because of what we did. And it's really along the lines of what you outlined in the opening.
Yeah, it's not conspiracy. It's the game plan. And look, and I keep coming back to this. When someone tells you who they are, why don't we believe them? This is what the Republicans have been talking about for at least a generation now, which is destroying all of those New Deal programs and all of those Great Society programs that really benefited the poor and working class of this country.
Well, unfortunately, as we saw just a couple days ago, there are a few members of the U.S. Senate who are bucking the leadership, bucking the White House, and are determined to not let this happen. Will they succeed? I don't know, but it's possible that this effort in the Senate could collapse.
Well, that's the hope, isn't it? I mean, I'm actually hoping for some gridlock right now because it's the only thing that's going to save thousands of people from being killed and losing their life over this stuff. And I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here, but the reality is when you're taking health care away from 22 million people, when you're cutting funding that could go to Medicare to help seniors stay alive, when you're cutting programs like LIHEAP and Meals on Wheels, when you're doing all of these just draconian, nasty, outrageous things, people will die, and I don't think that's being hyperbolic.
Well, Rick, I don't think there's any. I think it's appropriate to be hyperbolic. If ever there was a time for that kind of reaction, it's about this. This isn't just about numbers. This isn't just about charts and memos. This is about people. And when you have a plan, as we've seen in the Senate, that will cut almost $800 billion out of the Medicaid program, we're not talking just about poor people. We're talking about middle-class people. 62% of Medicaid funding goes to take care of nursing home care. Who's in nursing homes? Seniors, disabled. And when they run out of money, spend down their assets, exhaust their assets, they rely on the Medicaid program. These are middle-class people who need the help from the Medicaid program when they have spent their resources for nursing home care. And, that happens pretty quickly when the cost of a nursing home is $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year.
Yeah.
So you are absolutely justified in reacting the way you are. And I think that you're not alone. You're seeing some of the resist movements around the country. This has a momentum to it that we haven't seen for quite a while.
Yeah, I'm all in favor of that, but I would like to see a sanity movement because this is nuts to me. The idea that we're throwing Granny out, well, eventually we're going to be throwing Granny out into the curb or maybe even to debtor's prison. Hey, let's bring back debtor's prisons. What do you think?
Well, I know you're being sarcastic, but it's I think what you're saying is completely justified.
I mean, because here's the thing. I mean, I know everyone likes to think that we're never going to need anything or we're never going to get old. But guess what? We're all going to get there, and we're all going to at some point maybe need to have this safety net underneath us so that we don't end up in places like debtor's prison. Look, I remember as a kid growing up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. My mother worked at a nursing home that where people were indigent. And it was a horrible place. It was a place where people were just warehoused. I don't want to go back to that. I don't want anyone to have to go through that. It's insane. It's ridiculous. And I think these stories have to be front and center as we not discuss the health care bill.
What I'm reminded of is at the end of President Clinton's term, I remember being at an event, and he talked about the need to build a bridge to the 21st century. And what this bill does, as you just pointed out, when you talked about debtors' prisons and the other things you commented on, this bill is really an effort to build a bridge back to the 19th century, right? Before we had Medicare, before we had Social Security, before we had the Medicaid program. And the message, really the underlying message in this bill is you're on your own and good luck. And I'm not even too sure about the good luck part.
No,
but that's the message. And, I think you're seeing a lot of support for stopping this kind of effort in the Congress and in the White House. I saw some polling results just this morning, and the polls show that support for the bill that's in the Senate ranges from 12%. This is across party lines, across demographics, 12% up to about 17%. Yep. So I'm hoping that the members of Congress that are looking at this will realize that they don't represent the president; they represent people, and the people don't like this approach.
Yeah, I understand. You look at the 12%. I understand 1% of them being happy with this. I don't get the other 11.
Well, they haven't been educated enough, and they need to listen to discussions like the one that we're having, and they need to realize that these programs, as I said, Medicaid is not just for poor people. It's insurance, it's assistance for middle-class people who have spent down their resources. Social Security, Social Security is insurance for families. Federal Insurance Contribution Act, FICA, it funds old age and disability and survivor programs.
Yep.
So once the message is fully explained that these programs are insurance for families, and that, as you made an interesting point. You said we're all going to get old. Well, if we're lucky, we'll get old. But if we do, we're going to need a safety net. Most of us are going to need a safety net. What's really galling about this bill is the reason. Why are we doing this? Why are we cutting almost $800 billion out of the Medicaid program? Why are we turning our backs on seniors who need and the disabled who need nursing home coverage? Why are we doing it? So we can save the money from these changes to the Affordable Care Act and use it to provide enormous tax breaks to the wealthiest people in this country.
Yeah, that
does not make sense.
That and John Boehner won't have to pay taxes when he goes to the tanning bed.
Well, we'll see.
No, because that's the first tax that the Senate bill does away with. September of 17, they're doing away with the tanning bed tax, which was a very small tax on people who use tanning beds and the supply of them. And I go, that's the first tax you're getting rid of? Yep, that's the first one.
Well, that and the one I mentioned on high wage earners that extends the solvency of the Medicare program. That there is no reason to shift these benefits away from people who need them in order to provide tax breaks for people who don't need them.
It's I got to be honest. It's something that should be angering each and every one of us. So, what are you telling people what's the direction? What should folks be doing? What are you guys advocating for?
Well, we're advocating keeping the pressure up, letting your member of Congress know that in House and Senate that you oppose the changes in the House bill and the Senate bill that are going to hurt real people. We saw in the House the first time around the bill did not have sufficient support and it was pulled. And about a month or 6 weeks later, they got their act together and they passed the bill. Now we're looking at this at the Senate. Same thing happened on the first go-around on Tuesday. I understand that the majority leader, Senator McConnell, is trying to develop a substitute and have the Congressional Budget Office score it during the July 4th recess, with the hope of bringing a bill up for action. So it's important that members of the Senate who have stood firm, and there are a few of them, need to be thanked and encouraged, and those that have expressed their support for this bill need to be put on notice that it may be good for the wealthy, it may be good for the insurance companies, it may be good for the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry, but it's not good for your constituents, and those are the people who are going to vote next November of 2018, November of 2020, and so on.
And again, it comes back to that ballot box. It comes back to remembering all of this, because it seems, sadly, a lot of us have some kind of amnesia that when we go to the ballot box, we don't hold these people accountable for the bad decisions they make.
Well, that's the way we can hold them accountable. That is really the recourse that we have, and as long as we can express that and get that point across in the strongest terms possible, we've got a chance.
There you go, Max. I appreciate the time. Great talking with you. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you very much.
Good talking with you, Max Richmond, CEO of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. If you want to check out their website, we'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com or go to ncpssm.org. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We gotta take the bastards down.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1936. Jesus Polares, a Chicano miner and union organizer, was deported from the United States. He was charged with having communist sympathies and declared an undesirable alien. At the time he was deported, Polares had been in the United States for more than 20 years. He found work in New Mexico as a coal miner. He first stood up to the mine bosses in Gallup, New Mexico. When he dared to speak out against the company, he was fired. He then went to Madrid, New Mexico, where he became involved in union organizing. There again, he was fired for speaking out, evicted from his company home, and blacklisted. Polares recognized that Chicano mine workers needed to stand strong. He helped to found the Liga Obrera de Habla Española, or the League of Spanish-Speaking Workers. The organization quickly gathered members around northern New Mexico and southern Colorado. It grew from a few hundred miners to more than 8,000 strong. Then in 1935, the miners went on strike in Gallup. Martial law was declared. 300 miners and their families were evicted from their homes. When a warrant was served on one miner to throw them out of their homes, others blocked the doors in an effort to stop the eviction. They were arrested for breaking and entering. Protesters converged on the jail and were met with tear gas. The sheriff and his deputies opened fire on the protesters. The fight left one sheriff and 2 miners dead. In the aftermath, Polares was jailed for his role as a labor leader. He was deported, along with more than 100 other Chicano miners. Deportation was a tool used to stifle organizing amongst Latino workers. Liga Obrera never recovered from the loss of its leaders. The organization lost strength and momentum. But Liga Obrera is proof that workers can organize and fight for a better tomorrow. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
From UN headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Fargas, for Talk Media News. Saudi Arabia is refusing to walk back or water down a list of demands issued last week to the Gulf nation of Qatar. Demands that include shuttering the global news network Al Jazeera and ending support for the Muslim Brotherhood. Saudi Arabia, along with the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Bahrain, are currently blockading Qatar, saying the country promotes terrorism around the region. Qatar has 10 days to agree to the coalition demands before it faces stiffer diplomatic and economic penalties. Saudi Foreign Minister Adel al-Jubeir met U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson on Tuesday to discuss the diplomatic crisis, and Tillerson minced no words, saying Qatar would struggle to meet certain of the Saudi demands. But his statement appeared to have little effect on the Saudi Foreign Minister, who said the demands remain non-negotiable. China's National Petroleum Corporation, CNPC, has suspended all fuel sales to North Korea over concerns the cash-strapped country won't be able to pay up its debts. Chinese officials said the move has nothing to do with U.S. demands that the country do more to rein in North Korea, but there may be more happening here than meets the eye. According to The Guardian, President Trump is weighing possible trade penalties on China for its laid-back treatment of the North Korean regime. Early in his presidency, Trump stopped short of declaring China a currency manipulator in the hopes of winning their support in a U.S.-led crackdown on North Korea. It seems his patience may now be running short. And the UN is reporting a major uptick in the number of migrants crossing the Sahara Desert in an attempt to free Central and West Africa. Some 600 people have been rescued in the desert since April alone, the majority of them in the expansive, sweltering sands of northern Niger, where overland routes lead to Libya, a frequent departure site for boat journeys to Europe. For more global news headlines, visit talkmedianews.com.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Fascist, you may be surprised. People all over this world are getting organized to bound to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. Pamela tweets, the GOP is setting things up so that we can't afford to live to be old. True. Yeah, they don't want us to. No, do the work. It reminds me of some of those dystopian novels of the 1930s, where they lived to about 35, and then your usefulness was no longer, and they disposed of you. Because hey, you're useful as long as you can clean up after them, produce their wealth, do the work. But gee, as soon as you need something, well, there's the curb, brother. Sad, sad, sad stuff. And as G. Brennan points out in the tweet, I'm just furious. And that should be the reaction, I think, of all of us. Anger, frustration, get mad, get furious. Because understand, this really is about us not having that future. Our children not having the opportunities that we had. Us not having the opportunities that maybe our grandparents had of living a long, full life with some measure of security. And as Max Richmond pointed out, the way we hold these people accountable is at the ballot box, which is why yesterday's announcement is scary to me. From the office of the Vice President, the memo reads, this morning, Vice President Mike Pence held an organizational call with members of the Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity. It goes on to say the Vice President reiterated President Trump's charge to the commission with producing a set of recommendations to increase the American people's confidence in the integrity of our election system. The Vice President says, quote, the integrity of the vote is the foundation of our democracy. This bipartisan commission will review ways to strengthen that integrity in order to protect and preserve the principle of one person, one vote. And look, by that he means we're going to figure out how to make sure that a bunch of you don't get to vote, and we make sure that our voters get to vote, and people who oppose us, not so much, especially you minority voters, you poor voters, you senior voters, who are all on our menu to attack, assault, and, well, kill off. The commission, according to the memo, is set to meet on July 19th. That is its first meeting, which will take place in Washington, D.C. The memo goes on to say, Vice Chair of the Commission and Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach told members a letter will be sent out today to 50 states and the District of Columbia on behalf of the Commission, requesting publicly available data from state voter rolls and feedback on how to improve election integrity. If I'm a Secretary of State in any state that's rational, the last thing I do is give Chris Kobach any information whatsoever. This is the guy who wants to do the cross-check thing nationwide, which is all about throwing people off the rolls. Look, let me be very clear. It is not illegal to be registered to vote in a number of different states. It's not. There was a moment in time when I moved to Pennsylvania from Ohio that I was registered in both Ohio and Pennsylvania. What's illegal is for me to vote in both of those places. Now, understand this. I didn't drive all the way back to Cleveland to vote when I lived in central Pennsylvania. Cast my vote here. So registered here, vote here, lived here, all of that. Didn't go back to Cleveland and vote. Didn't happen. What they want to do with this cross-check is they want to be able to say, okay, well, Rick is registered in both Ohio and Pennsylvania. We're throwing him off of both. He's not going to be able to vote in either. Now think about this for a second. They're going to take this down to the county level. Let's say you move out of a district. You register in the new district you live in. It's about throwing people off of the voter rolls, especially people who move around a lot. Poor people, working class people who are going from job to job. Think about what this means, because they keep saying there's all this voter fraud out there. In fact, Trump himself, 3 to 5 million illegal votes. Yet the state of Pennsylvania, and I used to have it on my desk, the state of Pennsylvania says we can't find any. When the voter ID, the voter suppression law here in Pennsylvania was in court, before any trial, there's a stipulation of fact where both sides say, yeah, we're not going to argue over this. We agree. In the stipulation of fact here in Pennsylvania, the state and the people who brought the suit, the plaintiffs, both agreed. There had never been a case in Pennsylvania or anywhere that they could find that the voter ID law would have stopped any crime from happening, because it didn't exist. Now understand that for a moment. The state of Pennsylvania, who pushed this law and defended it with tax dollars vehemently, agreed from the start that there had never been a case that law would have prohibited someone from illegally voting. Never. I mean, take that in. Let it sink in a little bit. And then ask yourself the next question, which is, well, if it doesn't stop any crime, why'd you do it? Why'd you do it? Who doesn't have state-issued IDs? Poor people, seniors, students, those people who generally vote for Democrats. Just kind of, let that sink in. And then you go back and you wonder, okay, well, the Republicans are doing all this horrible stuff. And it's all terrible. And it's all stuff that for, at least a decade, as long as I've been on the air, I've been talking about this. This is who they are. This is what they want. It's all about enriching the few at the cost of the many. There's no surprise there. And we know tax cuts don't work. We know that. We know beggar thy neighbor economic development doesn't work either, but yet they're still pushing it at us, aren't they? Still hammering away. And the reason I think they're not afraid, the reason they're not running for the hills with 12% approval of their signature healthcare plan, is because they're not afraid of the ballot box anymore. Because they know they've done enough gimmickry over the years to insulate themselves. They've done enough gerrymandering over the years to insulate themselves, and they will be okay. And let's say they lose. They're still going to be okay because, well, the wealth class that they've helped to create will make sure that they're taken care of. They can't lose. You know who does lose? You, me, our children, the future of this country. And at some point, the hope is we wake up. I mean, you go back to 2004, you go back to 2000 with the voting while black, kick those felons off. 2004, you had the caging that went on. Couldn't stop it in 2008. the policies of the Bush administration just caused catastrophe. I'll tell you, stay vigilant. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go. Anything you've got on your mind, things I've said, you'd love to email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
It's coming from the wind. You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better.